The problem is marketers, the bigger our budget, the bigger the need to do something massive and life-changing that is going to completely change the way we view advertising and things like vaccines for the foreseeable future. Whereas in reality, it could be as simple as giving an impoverished family a basket of lentils and thereby completely working towards eliminating poverty and disease.
This is the Brave Ideas Podcast, brought to you by Aqua, part of the Wonderman Network. Welcome to episode 32 of the Brave Ideas Podcast, the show that is all about bringing to light fresh perspectives from the worlds of digital and marketing. I'm Dan Herman. I'm a digital strategist. My life is probably a virtual reality experience, and I'm so damn humble. And today, I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Esther McGeer, Head of Conversation Analytics here at Aqua, and I'm more humble than Dan, and also very proud of it.
Today, we're really excited to have as our guest Beth Strauss, strategist at BaseTwo. Beth's favorite philosopher is Kant, and she has an overweight Scottish Terrier. And today, she's going to talk to us about behavioural economics. Beth, what's new?
Hi, guys. So I'm basically here to discuss a little bit about behavioral economics and the broader field of behavioral sciences. And what it is basically is just about injecting a little bit of human understanding into the way that people make decisions. So why this is what you could call quite a rapid departure away from the way things have normally been done is that it's a shift away from what academics call homo economicus. Okay, whoa. I know, very, very highbrow term. But basically it was just presuming that humans always make very rational and logical decisions, which as we know, they don't. So always presuming that people know what the best decision to make in a given context is, and that we know what's right for us right now and can put in some motion for things that we know will work later on for us, which we know doesn't always pan out.
So what you're saying is that there's a perception that human beings make decisions in a logical and rational way, but not emotionally. So what is behavioral economics really saying about how humans make decisions?
Basically, it's saying that we are affected by a range of other kind of contextual factors. So, I mean, we are humans after all. We're subject to emotions, to biases, and we have certain kind of psychological limitations which aren't really understood. What's fascinating about humans really is we have a really good idea about our physical limitations. You know, for instance, that you can't bench press a car, but we don't always know about our mental limitations and how we think. And that's really what behavioral economics is trying to fill.
So, Beth, how would that then play out in real-world circumstances?
I mean, in marketing circumstances, and I said I had to say this even though everybody gave me a little bit of crap for saying it, is it's really like we've been marketing to kind of Spock, if you're a Star Trek fan, for the last couple of decades. Because Spock is very logical and rational. He always knows what the best thing to do is. Spock would never smoke. You know, Spock wouldn't care whether his phone was an Apple or a Samsung or a Huawei. He'd simply look at the technical specifications. And really, humans don't function that way. So it really is about trying to understand how humans function. And it has an amazing kind of effect on everything, from the kind of restaurants you choose. I mean, think about it. If you go to a place that has two restaurants and you've never been to either, which one do you choose? The one that's jam-packed to the rafters or the one that has nobody in it? You automatically go to the one that's jam-packed to the rafters because that's an example of what we would call social proof.
Or sheep.
Yeah, or sheep, but basically social proof. So It's the wisdom of the crowds. It's that you take your cue from other people as to what the correct behavior is in a given context. So that's a really good example and one that we use all the time.
So I really love that example, and I find it absolutely fascinating how social proof is becoming such a critical part in how we make decisions on a day-to-day basis. So obviously we look at things like TripAdvisor, things like Zomato, that are really based on reviews. What's fascinating for me is when businesses generate that through data, try to generate and convince people around emotional biases through recommending them based on what they've looked for before. So, for example, Amazon and their recommendation engine, Netflix and their recommendation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think recommendation engines are also like a really good example of limiting choice. So there's also another principle called the paradox of choice, which is quite interesting because we live in a society where we have so much choice, too much choice. You know, choice in the kind of gender you want to be, in the different kinds of genes that you want. In anything you could possibly imagine, there is choice. And what a lot of people are now saying is that choice is not actually a really good thing for us. You know, too much choice is a bad thing, and a lot of the time it ends up paralyzing you. So if you can find ways to limit people's choice, it can actually a lot of the time spur them onto action, onto buying or converting to a product.
You probably have to be quite clever about it, though, because humans naturally see the holes in that. I mean, if it's something that we've operated in all our lives naturally, we see quite clearly when it's artificial. How do you do the restriction, still allowing people to feel like they have that choice and they're controlling the process?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with human design. And the reality is, coming back to what I said about the fact that people actually don't know what their mental limitations are, you'd be surprised how often people don't pick up what you're actually saying.
Sure.
So, yeah, a lot of the stuff kind of operates beneath the surface. Even the power of default choices, sorry, I'm throwing in random examples, but this one I really, really love, is the example of organ donation. So Austria and Germany both have organ donation programs, and the basis behind that is that you can opt to be an organ donor when you go in to go collect your driver's license. The only difference is the form that you fill out. So in Austria, the selection to be an organ donor is pre-ticked for you, and you have to untick it to not be an organ donor. In Germany, it is unticked, and you have to opt in to be an organ donor. And the difference in organ donation rates is something crazy like 87%. So Germany has virtually no organ donors, or they have a very low organ donor percentage, whereas Austria has a very high organ donor percentage, and that is literally just because the box was either ticked or unticked.
Wow.
I mean, would you pick that up if you went to go in and look at a form? Probably not. You probably wouldn't question whether they were trying to funnel you into a certain course of action.
Well, I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I'd always be thinking. But yes, I hear what you're saying. So how do we then translate that into what we're trying to do here in strategy or in terms of what we're doing in our marketing world?
I mean, what's great about behavioral economics and behavioral sciences is it was always a very niche thing, but it's something that's really come up in public dialogue a lot recently. And you no longer need to bring in a behavioral scientist or a psychologist or a behavioral economics academic to explain to you how to do these things. You know, a lot of the things you can simply educate yourself on. And a lot of the time as well, they're very small tweaks. So it's not necessarily something that requires a lot of budget. So, I mean, in cases, it's been as simple as, you know, refining your website to remove a button or add a button that can make all the difference between a 300 million rand increase. So that's really how it applies. It's just about understanding the principles and seeing how you can really kind of apply them in a digital space or a normal marketing space.
I mean, I think what you're saying is really pertinent and true, because the fact that behavioral economics manifests in our everyday marketing experience in ways that we don't realize. I mean, where a call to action is placed on a website, the way buttons and forms are constructed, the things that we're asking people to do on social media, polls, etc., etc. That's all about driving a behavior in order to achieve a business objective. I'd be really fascinated to understand how brands are using that, and if there are any examples of how brands have really smartly used behavioral economics in order to achieve their business objectives.
Well, I mean, I think what's probably the biggest example that we've seen a sudden explosion of is in wearable technology and the kind of data that those can accrue to give you insight into how you behave. So a key thing in changing behavior is actually being able to see your progress towards achieving your goals. So it's something that we call feedback loops, and it's something that's been employed in everything from like locomotive engines to mathematics. But before, it was very expensive to get all that data, to collate it, and to kind of spit it out to you in a way that a normal human being would understand was very expensive and a huge drudge process. But with the advent of data collection and wearable technology, even if you had to take a Toyota Prius, which in America is like a hybrid car and really, really fuel efficient, and can literally track how much fuel you're spending per mile, it's become easier and easier for us to get that data and to put it back to the consumer in a way that they will understand and so that they can track their progress. That, I mean, everything from Fitbit, you know, Fitbit, PingFit, PongFit. Yeah. That whole thing is a very good example of kind of wearable technology and how they can show you a user interface on your app, on your mobile phone, on your desktop computer to show your progress towards reaching your goals, and also to give you certain behaviors of how you can change your current actions to make you more likely to achieve those goals in the future.
And to add to that, obviously, what Discovery are doing with now their Active Rewards program is a great manifestation of behavioral economics at play, because what they're really doing is rewarding people on the basis of their behavior with economic things like Apple Watches and or discounts. So it's really fascinating how, especially in the health sector, the one example I connect with a lot is that the wearables have really pushed people into behaving in a specific kind of way. I'd be quite interested to understand if there are any less digital examples. What are the kind of old school ways that people used to use behavioral economics?
Off the top of my head, I mean, there are a couple, but the really fascinating applications involve a lot of NGO work. So like I said, the organ donation one is a really good example. Or even something as simple as trying to encourage people to increase their vaccinations in third world countries by giving them a basket of lentils if they get the vaccination. I mean, that sounds like ridiculously simple. And a big point that a lot of people draw attention to is that the problem as marketers, the bigger our budget, the bigger the need to do something massive and life-changing that is going to completely change the way we view advertising and things like vaccines for the foreseeable future. Whereas in reality, it could be as simple as giving an impoverished family a basket of lentils and thereby completely working towards eliminating poverty and disease. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And I think the connection of how behavioral economics could be used to solve real-world problems is a great way to utilize it and how we should think to utilize it to drive that correct kind of behavior. I'd be quite interested to know how you've applied it in your day-to-day work.
Well, I mean, the most recent example was, I work on a banking client, I work on Barclays, but particularly the rest of the African accounts. And we looked a lot at what the barriers to saving were. So saving is a classic example of how human beings don't act in a logical, rational way. We all know that saving is a good thing. So the idea that saving is like a key pillar of wealth creation is very well known, but people so seldom actually act. So we really took a lot of time to understand the factors of why people don't actually save. And one of the key ones that came out was just inertia. So a lot of people presume that you need a massive amount of money to put away to even begin the saving process, whereas in reality, it should be smaller incremental amounts that eventually add up to a bigger savings total. So what we did is we took our cue from a really cool study that IBM did with ING Direct, which is an online bank in Canada. And one of the things they did was something as simple as a small savings tool. So they showed how small sacrifices could add up to massive amounts of savings relatively quickly over different periods of time. And literally all it was a build into the app to show, if I cut out my daily hamburger, how much I could save in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And simply that alone was enough to prompt people into action. So we did something very similar for a kind of a recent Barclays campaign, although we put our own spin on it. And it eventually kind of affected even the broader above-the-line campaign to the extent that the above-the-line creative was talking about, would you rather have 24 hamburgers or a really snazzy laptop computer in a year? So that's really one example of how we've recently kind of applied some insights from behavioral economics and the behavioral sciences.
And what's the right answer, the hamburgers or the laptop?
Well, it really depends on what you want, but in terms of delayed gratification, I'd definitely go for the laptop.
No, so I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I love how it's used to solve real-world problems in the South African context, because we know how, there's recent research around how people just aren't saving, especially in a tough economy, and they'd rather keep up with the Joneses and spend money that they don't have than save. So it's a really beautiful example of how BaseTwo have really used this theory and applied it to their perspectives. What do you think about that?
Well, I'd be really interested to know. So obviously you need data to inform your decisions when it comes to behavioral economics.
In some circumstances. Sometimes it's just about the principles.
So that's really what my question is around. Do we have to have access to big amounts of data in order to apply this? Or are there things within our agencies that we can already make use of to start to understand human behavior?
No, you know what? A lot of it is really just about learning some of the smaller principles that you can apply in everyday practice. And some of them are ones that we have already been employing for a very long time. So you had to think about, for instance, the concept of framing, which is literally just about how you say something to someone. We know that makes a difference. So the difference between selling a steak is saying it's 10% fat or 90% lean. Which one are you more likely to buy? So we often already, as marketers, kind of unconsciously employ behavioral economics principles, but the more you know about it, the better you can apply them. And a lot of it is literally just about familiarizing yourself with them and seeing how, as I said, the smallest tweaks can make the biggest difference to the campaigns that you run.
Before I ask Beth a final question, I want to share my behavioral economics story. I was once listening on a podcast, and it was with a behavioral economist, and he was given a very interesting quandary. And the quandary was basically that this guy phoned him. He was interested in getting multiple wives, and he said, based on economics, I should be able to have multiple wives because love is abundant. So that's a very emotional thing, and he had construed that love was abundant. And the behavioral economist said, yes, you're right. Love is abundant, but time isn't. So you have to split your time. When you have multiple wives, you have to share your time equally, and your love, therefore, is not so abundant. So my mind was blown. And that's my story. So Beth, I think it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I really love this topic, and I'm really excited about how you're starting to apply it. If there was one thing you would take out of this conversation for Aqua, BaseTwo, the broader Wonderman Network, and our listeners out there, what would that be?
I think what I've said already in terms of the fact that it's for everyone. It is no longer a niche discipline. You don't need a guru to understand it. There is so much stuff online, which is really great, and I would really advocate anybody who had a bit of an interest in it to read some of the books that have been around for a while. Actually, there's one called Nudge, which is really excellent and particularly kind of applied to marketing and how we can influence people. And just to look at some TED Talks. So there are a couple of really cool TED Talks. For anyone that's interested, look at Dan Ariely and Rory Sutherland. So he's probably the biggest advertising advocate of the discipline. And just start familiarizing yourself with the principles. It's as simple as that. The reading is freely available.
Amazing. And if people want to get hold of you, Beth, where can they do that?
Rather on my email, so you can get me at beth.strauss@baseTwo.co.za.
Thanks, Beth, and thank you all for listening to the Brave Ideas podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or YouTube. And while you're there, give us a rating and a review.
For more awesome content and to subscribe to our e-newsletter, please visit the Brave Ideas blog, which you can find at aquaonline.com/Brave Ideas podcast. Also, if you want to get involved in the conversation, follow at Aqua Brave Ideas on Twitter or Brave Ideas Podcast on Instagram.
If you want to keep in touch with me, Dan, you can follow me at elhermo on Twitter and elhermo23 on Snapchat and Instagram. And you can follow Esther.
You can email me, estherm@aquaonline.com.
Special thank you to Beth Strauss, our guest. Thanks to Matt Klevansky for engineering and production, and thanks to Matt and Isaac Klevansky for the music. Thanks to Johan Buerter for the art direction, and to our distribution team, Magesh Ramsamy, Kirsten Wiggle, Sabella Kanyide, Simon Vickers, and Helen Semenis.
That brings us to the end of the show. We'll leave you with one final thought. There are no original ideas, only original people.